Hello, everybody, and welcome to the March MacSparky Labs deep dive. I've been looking forward to this one. We're going to be talking about OmniFocus today. And the reason I wanted to cover OmniFocus is because I've been on a bit of a journey the last, 4 to 6 months, I'd say, between Apple making improvements to reminders and me looking at other third-party apps. I actually made an effort starting last year after WWDC to see if I could replace OmniFocus. And, I'm not really in the bag for anybody. I just wanted the best possible task manager app that is as easy to use as possible. And I thought, well, now that I'm no longer a lawyer, maybe I can use something less intense than OmniFocus. So I spent a bunch of time in reminders. We've talked about a lot on the MacSparky Podcast. I did some videos for the labs as well. I looked at things. I looked at some of the online web stuff. And ultimately, I ended back with my first love, OmniFocus. And honestly, I appreciate it now more having gone out into the wild a little bit. And but also it has changed kind of my use of the application. It's really evolved over the last year. And I thought it would be fun to share with you guys what I'm doing with OmniFocus these days, hopefully give you some ideas for your own implementation. But also, I would hope that some of the stuff I talk about today could work with other applications as well. Before I get started, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about why OmniFocus kind of won the race for me. The first is the developer. I mean, the Omni group is a group of very talented developers. They were working on Mac OS 10 before it was Mac OS 10. They were on the next platform beforehand. And over the years, I've gotten to know a few of them. They are super, almost religious about their application. It always makes me laugh when I get on their betas and I'll see an update drop at 2 a.m. from Ken Case, who's the company president. I mean, company presidents usually aren't making code submissions at 2 a.m., but that's kind of the attitude they have over there about the whole application. So I like that, but there's a couple particular features that really resonate with me. It's very important to me that my task manager doesn't flood me with information. I feel like the task application is really the bank of things you want to work on, and you can have a lot of deposits in the bank, but when you go, you don't want to see them all. You just want to see what you need that day. And that kind of ties in with the stuff I did for you in the labs last year on calendars, where calendars are finite and tasks lists are infinite. Can you marry those two together in a way where you get the calendar showing what you should be working on generally, and the task manager giving you the specific tasks you should be working on today? And OmniFocus lends itself to that with things like custom perspectives, which I'm going to break down for you some of those today. Defer dates. I mean, that was one of my big gripes with reminders is there's no defer date in there. I put in the thing to pay my taxes next year, and it shows, and I was looking at it every day. Who wants to look at that every day? And then also just the sheer number of ways you can organize those perspectives to really slice and dice your data the way you want. Another feature in OmniFocus I really like, which I'm going to cover today, is the review process. I need to keep track of the projects, make sure nothing falls off the wagon. And the OmniFocus has a built-in system to do that. I'll show you what I'm doing with that. And then the automation story. What happened with, and this is just for us here in the labs. I don't really want to go public on this too much, but I mean, I feel like Apple really gave Sal Seguin the shaft when, they let him go after, he had been there running automation for them so long. But then the Omni group, they jumped on it and they brought him in, and he implemented an automation system for all of their applications, including OmniFocus, that works on all platforms: Mac, iPhone, iPad. It extends things like voice control. We did a whole video with Sal in the labs on voice control. And it's just like the automation story is unmatched. And then I think the final piece of OmniFocus that really sells me, and I know I'm preaching to the choir a bit here, is the ability to create links to anything in OmniFocus. They have the dynamic URL linking system, which means anything I put in there, a perspective, a project, an individual task, I can quickly grab a link for it, then I can put it in DevonThink, or I can put it in an Apple Note, or I can send it to, whatever, and I can always get back to it really quickly. So that's kind of the big picture view. So let me show you what I'm doing these days with OmniFocus. All right. You guys see the screen okay? Looks like it. All right, good. Whoops. Let me just put OmniFocus up in front. Well, the first thing I do is I take advantage of the tab system. I did a video for this, the labs, where you can automate this, but it's just Option Command T, and you can create a new tab. And once you make a new tab, then you can attach it to any perspective. Like I'll say there's my flagged item tab, and you see they're labeled up across the top. The ones I really use a lot are do, forecast, checklist, inbox, and review. Do is from the Star Wars nerd in me, referring the Yoda quote. Do, there is no, what is it? Do or do not, there is no try. So I like to think, well, what do I have to do today? And this is a perspective that drives my daily system. As an overview, I also use the forecast system. And one of the things I do with forecasts, and I'll come back to all this for you later, but is I also show certain items that have different tags in them in my forecast view. A lot of people don't realize you can do that, but it mixes in the calendar items with your tasks, which I think is really nice. Checklist is kind of a new feature I'm going to talk to you about. I've got an inbox and my review list, which I'm sorry, guys. I did my review last night and I forgot I was doing this today. So I'll maybe unreview something so you can see how I do that. And then flagged, I just created for you. But for me, the whole thing comes down to do. And I wanted a system, coming back to OmniFocus after this journey, where I had a simple way to get my do list. And I've seen a lot of strategies on this. I've done them in the past. I've used deferred dates as a basis to show anything with a deferred date of today, but I feel like that becomes too much work to manage. I don't know if anybody's tried that system, but basically every task you have, you put a defer date on it, and then they just start showing up, and then you change the defer date. In fact, the very first version of the OmniFocus field guide I did really was a proponent of that system, but I realized after a while that that's too much work to manage that. So I don't want the defer date to be the basis of things showing up on my do list. I've played with the idea of using flags, and the problem with that is then you get too many flags, and to me, flags are a priority item that really needs to get done. In fact, you can see right now, I have no active flags in front of me. So none of that stuff's going to show up either. And then, so then I realized what I really wanted was a hybrid approach. So I started building these subsystems into OmniFocus. And before I explain do, one of the subsystems I put in was this checklist. And, I was playing with habit tracking apps for a while, though we talked about those on the Focus podcast. And I felt like they were really naggy. And I hate the process of these habit tracking apps in that they get so hung up on the streaks that you become obsessive about it. And I know that's a way to, play with our monkey brains to get us to do something. But you're like, oh no, I've, brush my teeth at lunch every day for the last 60 days. I have to do it today, no matter what. And, and then you break the streak because you're not somewhere with your toothbrush or whatever. And then you feel bad about yourself. And I thought, well, that's just dumb. So I made checklists in OmniFocus. And the way I do that is I just make a task and I give it a tag called checklist. Let's see here. Reliable human is a good one. In fact, I'll go back to explain that too in a minute. There's just a lot to this, guys, so you have to excuse me if I seem a little disjointed. But like every morning, I take a look at my calendar and I look to see if I have any meetings the next day. And if I do, I always send out a reminder, and I've got a shortcut I wrote that does that. I just type in the person's name, pick the event, and it sends it out. And so under a reliable human thing, I have this item, send out confirmation emails for any meetings tomorrow. Well, I checked that earlier today and I don't have any. So I'll check that off in a minute. But you'll see one of the tags I added here is checklist. And one of the big picture concepts I'd like you to take from this meetup is use tags for the purpose of creating sortable and later usable perspectives. Tags are often things like, priority or location, kind of the traditional David Allen idea of context. But tags really can just become a computer device to help you sort your data later. And checklist for me is one of those. So I have checklist stuff, and some of it's habit stuff. And like, this is kind of a habit thing for me. Every day I send out emails to people that I'm going to meet tomorrow. and make sure I don't meet them. And you'll see this repeats every day. So, and it's every day after completion. One of the things I like about OmniFocus, and I found a lot of other apps don't really do, is managing repeating tasks in intelligent ways. So because this one has a start date and not a due date, it allows me to make that from completion. Now, if this was a task that didn't have a start date but only had a due date, let's say I make it due in one day, then you have a different set of options here about how the repeat formula works. But because it doesn't, it's just a start date based tag. I'll just type in today here and then delete that. Then you'll see the options change again. And so it changes the repeat options based on the nature of the task. And so I really like that. So every day at 12 a.m., it's going to create a new task for me, send out confirmations for emails tomorrow. I've already done that. Just click that. So I'm good. And that doesn't mean that I have to send out emails every day. A lot of days that'll show up and I won't have any meetings the next day and I'll just click it off as done and just move on. But that's kind of part of the morning process for me to go through and check that. And so I can look at this checklist. In fact, you'll see I have in the sidebar a little perspective button here for checklists so I can get to it very quickly. And so I've added a bunch of stuff to checklists. AM journal is another one. I already did the morning journal. I did that 2 hours ago. I'll click done. And now that's gone. That's another one that repeats every day. And that's just kind of a reminder to me to do the journal. So that's kind of folding a habit tracker into OmniFocus under the guise of a checklist. I have a project for the dog. We're supposed to schedule grooming. So I'm going to do that later today. That's on the list for today. You'll see that one actually showed up yesterday because it's been 5 weeks since the last time she got her haircut. And I didn't do it yesterday. I just left it on the list, but it's still on the checklist for me today. So one of the first kind of changes I've made with it is the inclusion of what I call checklists. Maybe I'll just take a little break there if you guys have any questions about checklists before I kind of move on. Any questions about this?
So the last one, David, the grooming, if you take that off, it then moves 5 weeks forward or 6 weeks forward, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. If you look at that, you see it moves 5 weeks after completion.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, and the interesting thing about that is it's not get the dog's haircut, it's schedule the dog's grooming. Yeah. Because if I do get the dog's haircut, I don't know, I might not actually get the dog's haircut till next week. But to me, if I put 5 weeks, if I schedule it again in 5 weeks, it all works out for me. But I found when you tried to make these things completion of task-based stuff, it gets really fuzzy. Like sometimes it takes longer than it should. An example for me is like some sponsor management stuff. If I do it after I bill the sponsor, it makes a lot less sense than if I do it after I just set up the sponsorship. And so I would encourage you, if you do these types of repeating tasks, think about them as using this as a trigger to almost schedule a project. You know, I'm not going to create a project for getting the dog groomed, but in essence, it is. You know, I got to call the groomer, I got to get the dog to the groomer, but none of that stuff's going to be an OmniFocus. The only thing I'm doing is giving myself a trigger to kick off that process every 5 weeks. Make sense?
Kind of project are you setting up? Is that like not a sequential, but a single action project? Or
yeah, so like for this one, I'll go over to my project list here and go down to under rely. In fact, let me just take a little side trip for you and I'll answer your question. If I forget to answer, please give me a nudge. But you guys have seen me talk about my roles-based system. These are my roles, and I put all my roles as a separate folder in OmniFocus, and one of them is being a reliable human, and one of those is taking care of the dog. So like, I don't have a lot in here. It's a single action list, but we got to schedule a vet visit every like 6 months, which I've been putting off. You can see here, I deferred that one till tomorrow, and we got to get her groomed every 5 weeks. And that's all I have to do in terms of being a dog owner. And occasionally something will show up, right? You know, but that is and a lot of these are single action projects. And these are both checklist based. You see, they both have the checklist tag on it because that's something that would show up on a checklist for me. And so I've broken my whole system down here by roles in my life, and some of them have tons of projects under them, and some of them have just a few. Let's see here. Like for MacSparky, you can see I've got a bunch. But one thing you'll note is it's not an overwhelming number of projects. That's another thing that changed with my return to OmniFocus is when I was a lawyer, and I know there's some lawyers here, you guys know what it's like. There are so many projects to manage as a lawyer because you have all these different clients. You've got different types of work you're doing for them. And those make sense to become individual projects. Well, one of the benefits of the change in my life is that I don't need to have so many projects now. So rather than make a lot of projects, like I don't auto-generate a project to get the dog groomed, I just have these single action lists with a lot of triggers in them to other projects. And that's another big change for me in that my system is a lot easier to manage because my life is a little simpler now. I would say I'm equally busy, but not as disjointed because the type of work I'm doing doesn't disjoint you as much. Now, if you have a job where you have to do a lot of different things, manage, like if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you've got a lot of different small obligations, then I'm not discouraging you from making multiple projects, but I would encourage you to make as few projects as you can, because I do find with this revised method that it's a lot easier to stay on top of things if you don't have 300 projects you have to review instead of just 100. Okay, so one of the big moves for me was to this checklist, and so that was the first kind of move in terms of like trying to get to a do list that makes sense. So historically, the do list for me had evolved into a flagged list, in essence, a glorified flag. If it was a flag, it showed up on do. But then I started to realize the checklist was a separate thing. So I've got separate perspectives here where I can just look at the checklist. And to me, a checklist item is not necessarily something that has to get done today, but it's something that's on my checklist. And so I can just go to it anytime I want. It looks great on the iPhone, by the way. And you can just say, oh, what's on my checklist? Oh, I need to do this thing. Like weekly downloads from Shortform. I subscribe to that Shortform service and I love it. They allow me to download 3 books a week as PDF. So I'm slowly getting them all, I can't help myself. So every week it shows up, and I actually did that this morning. And you see, this actually showed up on the 27th of February, but I never got around to it. But if I look at it on the list, it's on my checklist. It is there's the link because you can put links in OmniFocus tags. I click that, it goes to my page. And then every 7 days after completion, this one isn't after completion, it shows up again. Well, I did it this morning, so I'll click that off, and now that's done, and I won't see it on my checklist for another week. And I just hit Command K to clear it out. So it's just nice having a little checklist. But then I realized not everything, I was putting stuff on the checklist that wasn't really a checklist item. Like a good example is I've got one here I see that needs to get moved. I work on the outline for Mac Power users every week around Wednesday for the following we record on Tuesday. So the day after we record the show, I start working on the outline for the next week's show. And the sometimes those outlines are in development for months and sometimes they're not. It just depends on the show. But that's not really a checklist item for me. That's just a thing I do. And I don't have to do it on Wednesday. Like I didn't do it yesterday, but I'm going to do it today. But I felt like there are some things that really don't qualify as checklist items for me. So I made another perspective and I call it radar. And it's just like, it's on my radar now. There are things that are important to me, but they are not must do today things. And where this doesn't really fit as a checklist item, it fits as a radar. So I created a new perspective called radar, and you see task status radar. So I've added that, and now I'm going to take this off the checklist. So now it'll disappear. And you see, that's really not a checklist item for me today. But if you go down and look at my tag listing, and there is some housekeeping that needs to be done here. And don't be intimidated by my task list because I'm making field guides and always testing things out. Some of these I don't really use much. But one of them that I have is called task status. And underneath it, I have radar, waiting for, active, and planning. Like active and radar meant the same thing, but I thought radar sounded sexier. So I just started calling it radar. Either way, so you can see I've got these different categories, and one of them for me is task status. So So now I've got two places I can look that aren't urgent tasks, but they are important to me. And what that does for me is creates a way to rebuild the do perspective. So, getting back to this, now you see on this thing, for instance, work on MPU outline is on my do perspective, but it's no longer a checklist and it's no longer flagged. You guys know what I did there? It's not rocket science. What I did was I created a perspective here, and it's a any of the following perspective to create this do list. And this is what I work out of every day. So if a status of a project is due soon, it goes on this list. Or if it's a checklist or a habit, because I sometimes use habit and checklist interactively, so I kept both of those, then it goes on this list. If it's active, and I'm going to be getting rid of that one as soon as I kind of filter that out, because I've decided I'm going to go with radar instead of active, because active feels a little too actionable to me. Radar sounds better. So if it's active or radar, it goes on this list. If it's flagged, it goes on this list. Okay, so I've created these subcategories of important areas that go on this list, but I don't feel that I have to do all of these every day. It just, it collects the stuff that's important to me, but not urgent. And, it's that category B in the Eisenhower matrix, which is the stuff where you actually make money and succeed. But it does also include urgent stuff. Like if something becomes flagged, then it gets on there. So as an example, I'll make a new task real quick here. Here is something urgent. And I'm going to flag it. If you hold down Command-Shift-L, it creates a flag automatically while you create it. I'm not even going to attach a project to it. Well, actually, I need to put a project on it. So I'll put Labs. And then, but I'm not going to put any other tags on it. So it's not going to be triggered by any of these tags, and save it. And you can see it shows up immediately on the do list because it got captured by the flag. So I will not go to bed without the flags being empty, but so I have the urgency category covered in this one perspective, but more importantly, I have the important but not urgent stuff covered in this perspective. And the way I did it was building separate perspectives about checklists and habits and radar tasks, and then folding those into the do list. But then I can still separate them out. Like, I can still say, show me just the checklist or show me the do. And you'll see that the checklist items will show up on do, but they don't necessarily, if I want to just look at the checklist, I can do that too. So this isn't advanced programming, and but it's a use of the application, which is like multiple layers of filtering that I find really quite useful. You guys have any questions at this point as we kind of go through this?
So to keep the checklist items that show up on the do, those are the ones that are available. In other words, they've hit that defer date.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So everything is also, if you look at the perspective, and sorry, Zoom is conveniently covering up the buttons I need the most. So if you look at the perspective, it's any of the following. So the status, the tags, but then also it must be available. So if it's not available, it doesn't show up. So there's two layers of filtering going on in this perspective. And if you want, I'll put a screenshot of this in the when this video goes out, so you can look at it closer. And this is all in OmniFocus by the way. I don't know if you guys are in that yet, but it's real nice and it's usable now if you want to get in the beta. But so the first condition is all of the following. So all of the following mean it must be available and it must be one of these categories, but it can be any of these categories. Like if you made this all of these categories, then nothing would show up because there's nothing that's flagged and tagged with all of these different conditions. But this is a nice way to use the application where it doesn't feel overwhelming, but still gives you the stuff that's important to you, but not urgent. And I think that's really what you want out of your task manager, is a way to help you get to the stuff that actually pays the bills and moves the ball forward. Brian, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, David, the way you were describing flags, I think you said you don't close out the day without having cleared out the flags. Does that replace due dates for you? Do you stop using due dates?
No, I use due dates as well, but I use due dates for actual due dates. I mentioned the dreaded taxes earlier. April 15th is a due date for me. And that's important to me. Due dates are more important than flags, and flags are more important at least in terms of the sense of urgency, not necessarily in terms of the actual work being more important. But I rarely have a due date on a task, but occasionally I do, and but to me, the rarity of due dates means I never miss a due date. And I've been talking about that for years, but people who have, 50 due dates, they don't do due dates. They just, the problem with 50 due dates is you may have one there that's an actual due date that you miss because it gets lost in the noise. I would rather have 2 or 3 due dates that really get your attention than 50 where you miss the thing that's urgent. And having been a lawyer, I can tell you it's malpractice. Like if you miss certain dates, and I know we've got some lawyers in the room, so there's no way you can miss a due date. So you've got to find a way to address them that keeps your eye on the ball. Tim, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how you actually create a tab. I showed my tab bar, but Command T
It's
isn't.
Option Command T. Command T.
Thank you.
And if you look under the File menu, I think it's under File menu in OmniFocus, you can do it through the menu there as well. And I did a video on this in the labs. You can go back and watch where I automatically created all the tabs. So when I open OmniFocus, it just auto populates them for me, which is kind of clever. And the trick to that is you attach keyboard shortcuts to each perspective. So you basically hit Option Command T, then the keyboard shortcut to open the perspective you want, then the next one. So when you open the app, it just sets itself up for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
We had Caitlin Salsky on the Mac Power Users recently, and she did it in a way where she creates separate windows and tiles the screen with all the perspectives. And I think Caitlin's awesome and super smart. That would make me want to jump out a window. I would rather just be able to see one tab at a time. Matt, you get your hand up too.
Yeah. You mentioned, I saw that on your due perspective, you have all the radar tasks show up. So then how is that? What's the radar perspective for if you're already seeing them on due?
Well, if I want to see radar without anything else, say, what's on my radar right now? And then if you look at my radar perspective, it's like this. And I've been playing with this perspective. Like right now, it's just showing me available items. And what I've been thinking about doing instead is, in fact, I'm going to do it for you right now. I'm going back and forth on this feature, but I think what I'm ultimately going to do with it is rather than just show what's active, I'm going to change it to, let me just open this up, remaining. And then I'm going to say sort. I'm doing this live here, so give me a second here. Organize individual actions, group actions by defer date. And why am I not getting? I should be getting future dates too here. Let me look at this again. So all the availability remaining, it's on the radar. None of the phone. So I also accepted flagged. I should be getting, look, I don't want to do this under the gun here, but basically I was thinking about setting up in a way where I will see future radar tasks, like not only what's on the radar right now, but what's on the radar in the next week. And that should be working with this perspective. And you know how when somebody's over your shoulder and you're working on a computer and you miss something obvious, but I'm looking at this and I don't see why this isn't working. So just for giggles, let's just make a new one. So let's go perspective, add perspective. I'm going to call this future radar. And honestly, if you're using this app, you should get familiar with this whole perspective system. And I'm going to say, so availability is remaining and has a tag with any of, we'll say radar task status radar. There we go. And so let's see that one. There we go. It's starting to shift it down. And then we'll say group actions by defer date. There we go. That's what I wanted. I'm not sure why that didn't work the first time. But if you look at this, you can see this is what's on the radar today. This is what's on the radar for tomorrow. This is what's on the radar for the next week, and that gives me kind of a future look into the radar. And that was kind of the idea with that one, but I just haven't got it settled yet. But if you look at
Thanks.
If you look at my do one, the whole point there is just giving me what I need to see today. Mark.
So what does this do to your forecast?
Yeah, sure. Let's go over there.
And are you still using it?
Yeah, I use forecast. And so what forecast is showing me, if you look at my forecast perspective, I get it flagged items and items tagged with checklist.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have task status radar in there. So I can switch between them and then see what's coming up. And that's it's just another view into it. But to be honest, I think I do use this do perspective as my working list every day. And then if you start turning off things, the whole thing for me gets very small and can go in a corner. Right now, the widget in version 4 is not working, but the goal for me is to get this into the sidebar widget on the Mac so I can just slide it over and see the items that are on the list for today and not get hung up on it. But, the idea of this whole system is, once again, just to filter down. The whole thing is built around the problem of the Eisenhower matrix, that we don't spend time on the stuff that is important but not urgent. And I think task managers are all engineered around around urgency. Every task manager on the market has all these ways to show you the stuff that has to get done today, but not the stuff that should get done today. And maybe that's another takeaway for this. If you're using a task manager, figure out a way to make it do that. Make it give you the stuff you should do and not the stuff you must do, and see if it can help you out.
Mm-hmm.
There's more, though. There's more. And if you have questions at this point, just raise your hands, and I'm going through it. One of the things I've changed with the way I use it is my inbox mechanism. I felt like one of the things that is a hang up with OmniFocus is this idea that you must have a tag that empty it from the inbox. If you look at the default settings with OmniFocus, it says, where is that? Clean up inbox items which have both a project and a tag. That's the default setting. And then sometimes you find yourself just using tags just to get it out of the inbox when you really don't have a good reason for a tag. And I realized that I use tags, as I've been showing you throughout this video, but there are some things I have that just don't really need a tag. And the historical ideas of David Allen's context don't really apply anymore. Your computer is in your pocket. It's not just on your desk. And so like those historical context-based tags don't always apply. So you find yourself adding them just to get it out of your inbox. So I turned that off. I said, no, just if it has a project and it's in my inbox and I don't put a tag on it, that's okay. Just put it into the system. I don't care. And so that was a change I made that made things clean up faster. I've got to do the statement of information. I have a little bit of lawyering this week. I have to file my statement of information for my corporation. So that would, I can give that a project, but I don't really need to give it a context, and I'll probably flag that one because I want to get it done. And then, we got a new car and I'm trying to figure out what these things are they're doing with the car. So I've got a few things in the inbox, but to clear them out now, I don't use the historic system that requires both context and tag or project and tag. The other thing that I do a lot of is I use the Stream Deck aggressively with OmniFocus. I find it just a really fast way to do that. And this is my OmniFocus Stream Deck. So I've put some of my perspectives over here, and I actually need to add the checklist one. That one's not there yet, but these are like the do list, the inbox. I've got some perspectives on the left side. Then I've got, this is an item that just checks the box. So if I'm working on the Stream Deck and going through my list, I can arrow up and arrow down between tasks and I can check them off. I can also delete them if I decide to push this button. This is just a button, an icon I randomly picked that clears it. All it does is it hits Command K to clear the, like as you're making changes to tasks, sometimes they get deferred out into the future or whatever, and it clears that out. These are buttons that allow me to change the views. Like you can have it show the sidebar or hide the sidebar. Same thing with the inspector on the right side. These allow me to fold. One of the nice things about OmniFocus is you can fold up groups of tasks, so I can fold or unfold them with a button. This here just creates a link to OmniFocus. This just attaches a flag, Shift Command L. These are basic keyboard shortcut kind of things. And then this one is I think that's what is that? Oh, that's a review. That's a review. Shift Command R is my review button. But then I've got all these buttons here that are tied to Apple scripts. And if I look at my keyboard maestro, and I've published all this stuff in the labs, but if you can't find it, let me know. But like defer one day, oh, you know what? I don't do that anymore. So I had written Apple scripts to do all this stuff, but one of the nice automation features in OmniFocus now is that you can have date controls. So I just downloaded this plugin. You guys see this drop down? Is it showing up for you? So I've attached like defer one day to me is Control Shift 1, defer 1 hours to one. I'm sorry, tomorrow is 1 day is 3. So if I want to shift it to tomorrow versus add 1 day to it, then week, month, and year. So these are all ways to defer tasks quickly. So what I've done is on the Stream Deck is I've tied, this makes it today. So 0 is today. This goes an hour. This defers 1 day, 7 days, and 30 days. And I do the same thing for due dates. So as I'm going through tasks on OmniFocus, I can just set my hand on the Stream Deck and just quickly kind of triage them as I go through. And if I want to add defer and due dates, I can now do that on OmniFocus. If you get, I will do a video on how I set all that up because we're not going to have time for that today, but that gives you at least an idea about what I'm doing with Stream Deck on this thing. But, it has been a journey. Like I said at the beginning of the hour, I feel like OmniFocus continues to just be the best app. And I'm just really happy with it. Like I said earlier that I can link to anything. For instance, if I wanted to link to this task, all I do is right click on it and say, copy link. And if I open notes and hit a new note, then I've got this task here. And you see that's a link, and if I open the link, it goes right back to that task, So it just, the ability to move around with my data, like I put tons of those links in Craft because I do collaborate with other people. And as I was saying before we hit the record button, collaboration is still for me outside of OmniFocus, but I can get to any source tasks related in OmniFocus. Any other questions on this stuff in general? Matthew.
Hi, David. It's just a question really about your approach to almost sort of list hygiene, really. I'm interested in how you use due dates. So the tax example is a good one. Now, I'm self-employed, so in the UK, I have to pay my tax by the 31st of January. Do you have the 31st of January as the date on which you have to pay your tax, or do you set it a couple of days before, or is it the absolute last moment on which it can be done? I'm just interested in how you arrange things.
When it comes to taxes, it's earlier than that because I don't want to get in trouble. But it just kind of, it depends is the answer. Generally, it's a few days earlier, and that's the lawyer and me bleeding over from the old days, right? I just don't want to miss due dates. So usually I make it a day or two ahead of time. But I guess I honestly can't think of the last time I made the due date the actual due date. So to answer your question, it's always a little bit ahead.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like the way I'm using the app now is simpler than I've ever used it before. And that's okay, because when you look at my total number of projects now, like I said, here's the MacSparky listing. It's got, there aren't a ton of lists, and the I've got for instance, a good example is the podcast. Like I've got these lists here for the podcast. I used to have a separate project for each episode, and I just don't do that anymore. I create things down by a general project, and usually have a single action list that's got some stuff in it, and it's just a little easier. It's less things to check off, and just because of the way my life is organized, I can get away with that. Now, again, if you need it more complex, you should do that, but I would also encourage you not to do that. Like the MacSparky Labs is a good example here. I've got, things I want to do that are admin. I've got things here for content, for future content, and Friends of Dave interviews. And I just put it all in that list, and it shows up as I need it. I've considered as this one gets big, this one has 49 tasks in it. I've considered maybe I should make a MacSparky Labs admin and MacSparky Labs content, but I haven't felt an urgent need to do so yet. And I feel like until you feel an urgent need to break something into multiple projects, you shouldn't. And this is probably my biggest list, because this is where I work and make my living. Some of these others are more personal, but if you look in them, there aren't that many projects in them. But there we go. Like, see, I've got my taxes is a thing here. I've got taxes all over the place. So that actually belongs in Reliable Human. If you look in Reliable Human, I've got some here for, the taxes and the dog and family and personal business. And it's just not an overwhelming number of projects. And that for me has been actually quite helpful. Dave.
Yeah, it looks like you're not really using sequential projects in it anymore, are you?
Not really, because sequential projects are for more traditional style projects, right?
Yeah,
where you've got something like in your life, right? I know you guys have the harvest of the trees, and that would lend itself to a sequential project. But if you know what the sequence is, then do you need it in your task manager? A classic example for me of this has been the field guides. I know how to make a field guide. If you look at my field guide list for Obsidian Field Guide, which I'm spending a ton of time on right now, there's like 6 items in there. There's little check-in things I want to see, like, make sure to add a section about this feature or whatever. But the actual work of making a field guide doesn't really show up in OmniFocus at all, because I know what I need to do. I have a list of chapters. I need to do the research, then I need to record it, then I need to edit it. I need to get the closed captioning done. It's like, I don't need to check something off for each one of those. So yeah, there aren't that many.
Yeah, it almost seems like your checklists and radar perspectives kind of lend themselves to not using sequential, because it would hide too many things from you and they'd drop off.
Yeah. But I do occasionally make them for one thing or another, but I don't have many. Yeah. Steve?
Yeah. When you were talking about the automations and you pulled down from the automation menu, you had a lot more stuff on your menu than on mine. Are there things that I need to install, and how do I install it?
All right. So automation. So I've been lurking at Sal Segoyan's website about OmniFocus automation, and I've downloaded several and I've deleted several, but he's got this date controls one was made by somebody at the Omni group, but you just double click them to add them. I'm going to make a separate video on that, because again, that's something I really need to give a tutorial on. But you can add these libraries, and they're super powerful, because it's all JavaScript automation where they can do a bunch of stuff. And I've just installed more than you have. Like, here's one to parse the inbox. Here's one to link back to a task. Sal made this one for me. If you want to push out all deferred tasks, I don't really use it after he made it, but but you can see, you can basically add features to OmniFocus through automation now, and you just got to decide what feature you want. If you go to omniautomation.com, which is Sal's website, I think he's made 100 separate feature scripts for OmniFocus. So you can just look through them. And if you say, oh, I'd like OmniFocus to do that, then you just click the button, double click it to install it. And it also installs not only on your Mac, it'll install on your iPhone and your iPad too, because it's JavaScript based.
Okay, so I just have to go to Sal's site download it and it'll install it. So I don't have it on mine because I just haven't installed them from his site. I thought they were available within the OmniFocus app. Okay.
Now, and if you go back, I did like an hour interview with Sal as a Friends of Dave interview about 6 months ago or so-ish when he did that, because he also did voice control where you can trigger voice control and you can make OmniFocus work from your voice. And he walked through how to do that, but that's all based on the same infrastructure, the OmniScript stuff.
Okay.
Brian, you get your hand up?
Yeah, I love OmniFocus, and I especially love your field guides to it. Though after, as you warned so carefully, in not doing reviews as much, and I get so overwhelmed in it. And I was just wondering your thoughts on diving back in, and because immediately I see this, I want to dive in and implement everything on here. And then I open this thing up, I get so overwhelmed. And what would you say is like diving back in to, get as much set back up as possible?
Yeah, I wouldn't get as much set back up as possible immediately. I would just add the stuff you absolutely need to do and then slowly build a structure. If you want, you could copy mine, checklist and radar for the stuff that's important, and then just let the other stuff lurk there. I mean, there's a ton of stuff in my database you guys haven't seen because it's not listed as checklist or radar. But then when I do the reviews, I see that stuff. So then I can say, oh, you know what? This thing is now important enough. I'm going to add it to the radar, and I just add the radar task to it. And suddenly it starts showing up more for me. And that's kind of the hierarchy for me, due date, flagged, radar, and checklist, and then everything else. And everything else I don't see until I do the project review. But when I do the project review, often I'll see something. Okay, now it's time to do this, and then I'll add it to the radar, and then it starts showing up, and then I start giving it time.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Because
don't put everything in there. Just kind of build it up slowly. Like people ask me, well, can you find an automation script to like slurp out everything out of app X and put it into OmniFocus? I don't recommend that. I think you actually manually, make every task earn its way onto the list. Just type it in. And that's a great opportunity to say, this thing is not that important. I'm not going to even add it.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's kind of what I'm doing, guys. It's still evolving a little bit. By the time I make the next edition of the OmniFocus Field Guide, I'm sure it'll change some. But I've been enjoying the app more now that I've kind of found a new piece with it. And I think we all go through that sometimes. And I thought I'd share with you where I'm at. If anybody has any more questions before we wrap up, I'm happy to answer them. If not, we'll get this out, or you can send me an email and let me know how it's working for you and where you're getting your hangups.
I'll see you online on Monday, I think. Yeah.
It almost looks like a complete new dimension to your field guide.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a different way to use it. And what triggered it really was that my life got simpler, because you're a lawyer, you know what it's like. I mean, you have so many projects, like discovery projects, contract projects, and all of them separately need to be reviewed and analyzed and managed. And if not, you get in a lot of trouble or possibly sued. And now I don't have that hanging over my head. I actually feel like I'm probably with the majority of people at this point. I mean, most people don't have to be as manic as lawyers do for this stuff. And that's when I thought, well, maybe I don't need OmniFocus anymore. But no, I realize even if you don't have a massive list, OmniFocus still really honestly earns its place because it's just so powerful. And you can kind of transform it into whatever you want. The big hang up for me has always been the category B, the important but not urgent stuff. And I feel like I've kind of stumbled into a way to finally make that important and in front of my eyeballs every day. And that's what I'm aiming for here. And the way this ties into calendars is I will block time to work on the MacSparky Labs, but OmniFocus will tell me what I'm doing in the labs that day. Or I will block time, to work on whatever project it is, but it's OmniFocus that actually has the important but not urgent stuff I'll be doing. But this is a lot of fun for me. If you try this technique and it doesn't work for you, or it works, or you have a question, let me know. Just send me an email. I'm happy to help you out with that. I'll get some pictures of these perspectives up when the video goes up, so you can copy them if you want. But that's what I'm doing with OmniFocus. Thanks for coming today. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all your support in the MacSparky Labs. I enjoy the labs so much. You guys don't know how much fun it is for me to make this for you. And I love hearing when it's helping you out. So have a nice day, everybody. And love to hear from you if you have any further questions. Bye, everybody.